Three, two, one, go. Hello there, folks. It's me, Nerdy John here, also known as John Terry, and today I have a special guest host with me. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Chase, and I'm also in multimedia. I always wanted to do a podcast, so I think this is a really cool opportunity for me. So yeah.
Yeah, glad we could have you on today. And as you know, my last host, Gavin, we talked about World War One, and so now we're talking about the legendary sequel. We're talking about World War II. However, I think we should get into the rise of it first. As you all know, at the end of World War One, the Germans were forced to sign a treaty taking sole responsibility for the war, even though it was Austria who originally started the war. And so, as a result, they had a massive amount of debt that needed to be paid off. However, the Weimar Republic, which was the government that took over after the Kaiser, they thought it was a good idea to just print as much money as you can to pay off all the debt. However, because of that, the dollar, the currency that they were using, the name it escapes me at the moment. Can you look it up real quick?
Yeah.
The currency during the currency during World War II for Germany. The currency that they were using, it became less and less valuable to where a person would literally have to bring suitcases of the currency in order to pay for a loaf of bread. Children were literally playing in the streets with just stacks of money like they were blocks because it was so worthless.
Deutschmark.
The Deutschmark. The Deutschmark.
The Deutschmark.
Yeah, and it was a pretty bad time for Germany. Not a lot of people liked the new democratic system. There was a big rise of communism, and there was a small party that was beginning to take popularity, the National Socialist. We know them as the Nazis. But people think that Hitler started the Nazi Party. It was not that whatsoever. Actually, Hitler was a government employee, and he was sent to infiltrate them because they had the name National Socialist. So the government thought these were a new type of communist, when in reality they took their beliefs off Benito Mussolini, who the dictator of Italy, was the very first person to popularize the fascist party. So Hitler infiltrated, but it turns out he liked it so much that he became a member. And then as the years went on, he became one of the main figures of the party. And so in the year, I want to say 1923 or 1924, Hitler tried to stage a coup. It failed miserably, and hey, sorry about that, guys. We just had to do something real quick. Anyway, to get back into it, the coup failed, and Hitler was on trial. However, he gave such a quote-unquote passionate speech, and it also helped that the judge was pretty corrupt. What was it? I'm gonna have to look.
I want to say he went to jail.
Well, yeah, he went to jail,
and then I believe that's when he wrote Mein Kampf, which
is
Mein his Kampf. Story.
How long?
Which he talks about his I guess where he started from, and basically his backstory, and then
no, I don't think it had his backstory. I mean, Mein Kampf was mainly about his ideals for the German people. Yeah. It talks about Lebensraum, living space. His it was 1924, which he was in. He only served 9 months. It was a sentence for 5 years for treason. However, he was only there for 9 months. And here's the thing. We call this a prison, but basically, the only thing Hitler had to do was just stay in the prison. He was allowed to have guests coming over. He was allowed to have I think they actually gave him some pretty nice food. Like he was able to have
Yeah,
some
I mean,
hot tea.
It's
good-
basically like just being trapped in a room, but like there's like a guard that will just give you anything that you really ask for.
Right, and he was allowed to write his memoirs and stuff. Basically, they did the equivalent of slapping him on the wrist.
Right.
And so, after that fail of the coup, Hitler decides to do a more democratic approach. So instead of trying to do a flat-out coup, he tries to win the election, which again fails because his opponent was a well-respected World War I general. But the problem was his party was getting very popular because during the year 1929, as you know, the Great Depression happened. However, that didn't just affect America; that affected countries worldwide that traded with us because
If one nation didn't have the money, and then it would just infect everybody.
right, because we were the U.S. was actually helping Germany's economy recover, and it actually looked like it was somewhat going to recover. And so not a lot of people were listening to Hitler because Hitler was saying, "Oh, something bad's going to happen," and so something bad did happen, and so all the people went to him for answers because he was really the only one promising to fix anything.
Yeah, he was giving like, or I should say, saying like, "Oh, well, you know, something is going to happen very soon," and
Right.
it eventually did, and so the people just tried to, you know, look up for answers, and well, he was basically the only hope for them.
The thing was, he was really the only one promising them anything. And so he became, what was it, vice chancellor or chairman? He was basically given a role where it looked like he had a lot of power, but not really because the president was still above him. Before, like, the president is on his deathbed. The day before he dies, Hitler writes a law saying, if the president dies, I will be given total control, and you will call me the Führer. And that's what happened. The president died. He got total control of the country, and that's when he started breaking the treaty. The way he broke the treaty was through loopholes, because Germany's standing army was only allowed to be 100,000 men. But the way he did it was, those aren't 500,000 German soldiers. Those are 500,000 special police forces. Like
he was basically trying to cheat the system and saying like,
don't get me wrong, he flat out didn't follow the no air. He flat out didn't follow the no air fleet rule of the treaty. And he started demanding land. He first reunited Austria, because for those of you who don't know, he's actually technically from Austria. He's just of German descent. So he took over Austria, and then he demanded the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. He took over that after given the land. So even after he was given the German-speaking land, he went in and took over the country anyway. Actually, there's a funny bit about that because Chamberlain, not Churchill. Chamberlain was the Prime Minister of the UK at the time, and he went back to the UK with a paper signed by Hitler saying that he would respect Czechoslovakian sovereignty if he was given the German land.
yeah,
And he said there will be peace in our time. Literally, like, I want to say, like, the day later, he just takes over the entire country.
yeah. It's like just like saying, yeah, I'm not going to do that, and then just turning around and doing it anyways. It just, you know, means nothing to that paper.
Right.
It's basically like saying a big fat lie about, you know, saying, oh, I'm not going to do something, and then just turning around and doing it anyway.
Yeah, and the thing was, uh, Hitler would then sign a treaty with the USSR saying that, hey, if we invade Poland, you will get the land closest to you. Basically, they were going to divide Poland in half.
Yeah.
Because Hitler wasn't worried about France. He wasn't worried about England. He was really worried about Russia, though, because they had the manpower. And
Russia was pretty much the people to worry about in the war.
Right, because
United States.
as I was getting into, he was they had the manpower, and they were actually beginning to become an industrial power because the communists took over, and that's an entirely different episode onto itself. So on it was in September. I want to say September 11th. No, it wasn't the 11th. Let me look it up. When did start? No. Start. Hang on, folks. World War II. No, I didn't want. Maybe we'll give me this. Technical difficulties here. Okay. September 1st, 1939, Hitler invaded Poland. I want to say a couple weeks later, the UK and France declared war on him, but it was too late because he was already deep into Polish territory. Oops, sorry. And he took the country, and then Russia took the bits it wanted to. And for a good period of the war, for a couple months, it was considered a phony war because France didn't want to do anything. They had the mindset of the Great War, basically dig trenches, have a big defensive war. They didn't want to invade Germany, and Germany knew it couldn't get past the Maginot Line. That was a heavily fortified region of France that bordered Germany. So what Germany did was they invaded the Netherlands, they invaded Belgium to get to France. And by the time that all happened, it was too late to do a counterattack because the Blitzkrieg, Hitler's strategy, basically was get in as fast as you can, encircle them, cut their supply lines, and you won't have to worry about entrenchment, because a big worry of the beginning of World War II was that we were going to have another trench-type warfare, which dragged out the war. Nobody gained any land. And this also, the benefit of this strategy was invading towns, because you had hordes of villagers from the towns coming to like local areas where like the military would be, and they would like the French military had to slow down movement because of all the traffic. So that allowed Hitler's forces to get in and take over France, and they create a puppet state. They took in the southern half of France. They took the northern half of France, and the failed invasion of the UK really set him off. And another thing I should mention is Hitler actually really well respected Churchill, who took over for Chamberlain, because Churchill was as we would call, a hawk. He was determined to win a war against Germany, and Hitler had this weird plan for him. He would allow Churchill to live out the rest of his days in house arrest, but basically he was going to give him like a life of luxury. He would, because Churchill was interested in paintings, he would allow Churchill to paint, have political discussions. It was a weird thing. And later on, I say later on, this happened before the war. Germany made the alliance with Italy and Japan. And so Hitler, feeling pretty confident, went to war with the Soviet Union, thus creating a two-front war. Hitler expected this to be a quick war because he saw it as an unexpected attack. But as you're all aware, that didn't quite pan out
That
because of the Russian winter. The problem was all the German soldiers were in spring uniforms instead of preparing for a winter war. Their tanks' oil literally froze, and so their tanks were rendered immobile. And while they did take, they took Stalingrad, but the Red Army basically surrounded them and picked them off one by one till their forces drained to basically nothing, and they were forced to surrender. And because of Japanese aggression in China, the U.S. did an oil embargo on them, which caused them to bomb Pearl Harbor, which is the reason why we got into the war. And because Japan is Hitler's ally, he decided it was a good idea to declare war on the U.S. on the behalf of Japan.
And correct me if I'm wrong about this, but there was a letter that I believe Hitler wrote, and it was encrypted, but it basically said that we are going to attack America. They sent it to Mexico.
No, dude, no. That was World War One.
Oh, well, my bad.
way wrong on that one. Yeah. So yeah, U.S. officially joins the war in 1941. The front in Russia has been put to a halt. Britain is still the only democracy left in Europe, and the war continues on in the African front, which Italy is not doing too well in. The Allies were able to win in the African front after a couple years, and they had a plan to invade Italy, and they did that. The people actually revolted against Mussolini, imprisoned him, and then the Germans tried to save him. But as he got back into power, people killed Mussolini, and so Italy, the remainder of Italy anyway, became a sort of ally to the U.S. and the U.K. After this, the Battle of Normandy was planned out, D-Day, and they invaded northern France. The battle itself took months and months because it was originally planned to be a one-day invasion, but because of the forts surrounding the coastline, that took a day in itself, and then the resistance was pretty heavy in the northern French region. The Germans in the Eastern Front were facing pretty bad casualties, and so Russia was able to be on the offensive. The whole thing about that was they were fine. The UK and the US delivered supplies to the Russians, and so they were able to get better equipment. The Air Force was finally able to defeat the Luftwaffe, which was the German Air Force, and they what do I want to say here? They were finally able to push them back. They actually were able to invade Germany directly, and so you kind of have this race to Berlin of sorts. The U.S., the UK, Canada, and the Russians were able to meet up into one location, and they did a couple attacks on Germany directly. The Soviet Union was the first one to reach Berlin, and that's when Hitler killed himself. And so that was basically the end of the European theater of the war, which so we have the Pacific theater, which was Japan, I want to say Siam, which were the Axis powers. But then you also had Australia, the U.S., and then Britain fighting because Britain had colonies in that area of the world. As you know, the war actually, and for a brief period of time, the Soviet Union was involved in that war for a brief period of time. I think it was only for a couple months. And the U.S. develops the bomb thanks to the nuclear bomb thanks to the Manhattan Project. And so they're able to bomb Nagasaki and Hiroshima, which makes Japan surrender in 1945. This war lasted about 6 years, and the casualties were up in millions. It was a greater amount than World War One ever was.
Pretty crazy about how many casualties there were.
The official casualty count. The casualties. The casualty count, I want to say, was at least above 22 million. It was about a total of at least 70 to 85 million people perished in this war. This was about 3% of the population, and back then the population of the entire world was 2.3 billion. So, and I think because of this terrible war, and the two main countries that took the blunt end of the casualties were Germany and Russia. The war left them pretty battered. I think it's still today that there's actually more women in Germany than there are men because of
how many casualties there were.
And so in the end of World War II, the winning parties, the Allies, carved up Europe. The USSR takes puppet states. They take East Germany, East Berlin, and the Allied states re-establish democracies in Europe. And then you also have West Berlin and West Germany. And this is basically our setup for the Cold War. This was overall a pretty devastating war overall, and it kind of creates the climate we have today because of this war. U.S. itself has become more directed into world politics, and you have, like I said, the Cold War starting out from this, which is a decades-long conflict, which will be most likely the next video. There's not really a whole lot to say about this. We summed this up pretty well. Any final thoughts on this, Chase?
I mean, World War II, even today, still affects many people because the Jewish population just because of World War II, caused a lot of chaos.
Yeah, the concentration camps. Yeah.
And a lot of people who are Jewish, their relatives who were in that, and it still affects them.
And this is another misconception. It wasn't Hitler didn't just hate Jews; he hated all religions.
Yeah.
He actually wanted to get rid of the Catholic Pope, but because that was in Italy, Mussolini was an Italian, was Catholic. He didn't like that too much, but the Nazi view of religion basically was they thought it was a distraction, that the German people didn't need it, that they needed to help the state. Because nationalism, it's not just about pride for one's country. It's no life is greater than the state's life, and that's terrifying thought.
Yeah.
has been a shorter episode. This has been Nerdy John signing out, and with my co-host Chase. I will link his Instagram in the description below. Hope you all enjoyed today's episode.